and just hold out for some kind of unitary Bosnian state. So this is a major turning point in our diplomatic efforts.
The American administration made it quite clear that they thought that the proposals, the Kutilera and my proposals, were unacceptable.
With no agreement amongst the Muslims, Serbs, and Croats, and with all sides mobilized for war, the European community voted, as the U.S. insisted, to recognize Bosnia on April 6th, along with Slovenia and Croatia. This act, Roger Cohen of the New York Times later wrote, was as close to criminal negligence as a diplomatic act can be. Indeed, international recognition and the outbreak of the Bosnian War were simultaneous. The world put light to the fuse. Warring sides in Bosnia, the Serbs, Muslims, and Croats, fought for their own survival in 1992, Western countries sought political advantage by allying themselves with different factions.
Outside, individual countries have been playing sides and therefore escalating the nationalist competition within.
A war which could have been avoided in the first place would thus be prolonged, with more bloodshed, suffering, and refugees. When the fighting erupted in 1992, the UN mission in Sarajevo, known as UNPROFOR, was given the thankless task of bringing the warring parties together in some form of compromise. But the UN's attempt to be the honest broker was repeatedly undermined by the competing agendas of its own members, particularly the United States, which pressured NATO into supporting Bosnia's ruling Muslim faction, headed by Alija Izetbegović.
The United States, for reasons that are not entirely clear, has always been the very dogged champion of the Izetbegović Islamic faction within Bosnia. Britain, France, and Russia had always tended towards Serbia. The Germans, of course, had always been supportive of the Croats. If the various European interests had been allowed to govern in Bosnia, I think it's very clear it would have eventually led to some sort of an arrangement between the Serbs and the Croats, which would have ended, I think, with a minimum of bloodshed.
With strong support from the United States and Middle Eastern countries, however, Izetbegović had a clear interest in prolonging the war, in the hope that the West would intervene on his behalf.
And I think the American support, insofar as he's had that kind of support, has been to please their clients in the Middle East. I think that insofar as Izetbegović does hope to internationalize the war, which is his only chance of keeping it going, and he has an interest in keeping it going, and I think depends on continuing this Middle Eastern support.
U.S. intelligence was aware that since the middle 1980s, Iran had been training 250 Bosnian Muslims each year.
Iran has a number of strategic objectives in Bosnia. Part of that is getting an Islamic state firmly established in Western Europe.
The Sarajevo regime headed by Alija Izetbegović is a radical Islamic regime that is tied closely to the Iranians and other radical Islamic elements. You see, for example, in the person of Osama bin Laden, who is a Saudi but has been resident in Sudan, also in Afghanistan, who's the international nature of this radical Islamic movement, which is very supportive of the Izetbegović regime, to which he, in fact, is a member, a component.
But the State Department, in both the Bush administration and the incoming Clinton administration, brushed aside these concerns early in the war. It was not until 1996 that NATO leaders, worried about their own troops' safety, raided terrorist training camps in Bosnia run jointly by the Iranians and the Bosnian government.
It's an abomination. There are clearly terrorist training activities. These weapons here, in particular this plastic child's toy with plastic explosives and a detonator inserted in it, it has direct association with people in the government.
At the outset of the war, the U.S. was promoting the Sarajevo government as a multi-ethnic democracy.
The Clinton posture, as is clear to any observer, has always been based on two themes. So one is that the Sarajevo regime is a democratic, multi-ethnic democracy. And the second one is that it is the victim of aggression by Serbia, tentatively by the Croats if they get too obstreperous, but primarily by the Serbs.
Longtime observers found this description of Izetbegović's government and his SDA party misleading. The Bosnian presidency was supposed to rotate on a yearly basis, first to Serbian and then to Croatian leaders. But the fighting allowed Izetbegović to claim emergency powers for himself and his party, the SDA.
It's a wartime emergency government. I mean, by the constitution that's still technically valid in Bosnia-Herzegovina, he should have ended his presidency in December 1992. He's claiming that war emergency allows him to stay on, but not even that is exactly according to that constitution.
Contrary to statements by the U.S. State Department, Izetbegović rejected a multi-ethnic Bosnia in his book, The Islamic Declaration, written in 1970, where he states, "There can be neither peace nor coexistence between the Islamic religion and non-Islamic social political systems." Izetbegović's defenders claimed that he had modified his views, but in fact, the Islamic Declaration was officially reprinted in time for the 1990 election campaign without any changes.
The administration must be aware of that, and their protestations about the democracy and human rights and multi-ethnicity of that regime are patently absurd, and they know it.
Izetbegović further identified himself with extremist views in 1990, when he gave an interview to a magazine which celebrated Muslim World War II collaboration with Nazi Germany. The cover of the magazine pictured Serbian leaders with severed heads.
There are no Croats or Serbs visible in that Izetbegović government with any real authority. The Bosnian army, as it calls itself now, is mainly Muslim, Muslim manned, Muslim officered.
I don't want to give you the impression that I think all the people who are fighting on Izetbegović's side in this army are all of them fighters of the Holy War and Mujahideen. They're not. I think that a great many of them just feel, they belong in Sarajevo and they're appalled by the attacks that have had during the war against Sarajevo. And there are lots of young people who really genuinely believe they're fighting for a society in which all Bosnians can live together, and genuinely are multi-ethnic. But they are fighting in a cause which is to make Izetbegović president of the whole of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is not a Muslim country. It's mainly Christian, as you know. If you put the Serb Orthodox and the Catholic Croats together, you have a majority, an absolute majority. And it's ridiculous that it should be Izetbegović's under Izetbegović's undivided sovereignty.
Instead of reaching out to potential allies and presenting their case to remain as part of Yugoslavia, the Bosnian Serbs relied on their initial advantage in weaponry to pursue a military victory.
I think it's a civil war. I think everybody in what was Yugoslavia has a case of a sort. I think you can make a case out for the Serbs, you can make a case out for the Bosnians, you can make Muslims, you can make a case out for the Croats. But the difficulty is that they all were so extravagant in what the reactions to what all the others did.
The Muslims have been represented as the victims in